So welcome everyone to the Eco Forum tonight. My name's Hannah. I'm part of the team that organises these forums. I'm actually going to have to run off today. I apologise for that because I have a choir rehearsal to run. But I think it's going to be a really exciting session. So just to welcome Adam Matthews, who is here. He's joining us from South Africa, which he wasn't expecting to be. So he's going to tell us a bit more about that, because that's all quite an interesting story, and I think links in seamlessly with what we're talking about tonight. Adam is the Chief Responsible Investing Officer for the Church of England's Pensions Board. So he thinks about how the Church of England places its finances to do good. And he's going to talk about how churches and individuals, parishes can think about this stuff as well. This is being recorded, as Barbara said, so just so you're aware, and it'd be great if people can keep themselves largely muted. There'll be a chat time later where I think there'll be breakout rooms and things like that. So I'll open in prayer and then we'll get started. Dear Lord, all things come from you, and from your own do we give you. And we pray that tonight, as we think about perhaps a little bit beyond how we normally think about how we can use our resources, benefit creation, to benefit your world, we pray that we will be open to hearing new insights and new challenges. Amen. So over to Adam, I think.
Well, thank you ever so much for inviting me to speak to you, and just to introduce the two. Look, we probably look like a front row on a rugby team, but dressed up in suits because of some weird idea. But to my left is James, who is, and to my right is Stephen. I thought I'd bring them into this because it's sort of 9 o'clock here, and we've had a pretty full-on day, and I thought they could bring extra context to what we were going to discuss this evening. James is the Director of Peace Building at Lambeth Palace. His job is to support the archbishops in their ministry in relation to peace building around the communion, and he works very closely with the Pensions Board. And Stephen is the Deputy Chief Responsible Investment Officer. He also sits on lots of broader industry-wide initiatives that really support engagement with sectors like the mining industry, but also amongst other investors. And my job is as the Chief Responsible Investment Officer, as mentioned, and I serve the pension fund. And our duty, very simply put, is to provide pensions. We are legally regulated as a pension fund. Your collections on a Sunday in church, albeit I know that things have advanced beyond sort of pennies in plates, and some people it's more direct debits, but there is a contribution from that goes through the diocese that comes up through to the Pensions Board, and that funds the pensions of the clergy throughout England. And separately, we have a number of pension funds that support church workers. Together, we have about £3.4 billion, which sounds a lot. It is a significant sum. It's enormous responsibility that's entrusted to us. But equally, in the context of other investors, like, say, for example, universities, they have 100 billion. And you've probably heard quite a lot of coverage in the UK about the need for growth, and that pension funds are part of the reason we don't have growth, because they're invested in particular ways that isn't in growing the economy. And so we have a lot of investments across different kinds of ways of investing. And one of the jobs that I've got in particular, supported by Stephen, is to ensure that the way that we invest is consistent with the teachings of the church, and that we not only pay a pension, but that we're absolutely cognizant of the world into which those that receive the pension will retire into, and the fact that the way that we raise the funds through our investments, that we make the returns, that we do so in a way that is not inconsistent with the church's teaching. So it's quite a challenge. That there isn't like an easy reference chapter to do that in the Bible, but there is enormous wisdom and teachings that we can draw upon that enables us to be able to have advice provided to us that we then interpret into practical policies in terms of how you look at different investment vehicles, different kinds of investments and sectors, some of which is that we're able to make a determination that it's just wrong for us to receive any benefit from that. It's so clearly inconsistent with the kind of the getting a benefit from, say, for example, a behavior that is quite clearly inconsistent with where the church is at and where we would perceive our members at. We have to evidence that the members of the pension fund, and there are 42,000, are broadly supportive, and that we have a mandate from them to behave in the way that we do. And we do survey people. We survey all of those that are both receiving a pension and are to receive a pension to get that insight. And we've had very high support for the work that we do. I've got to be honest. The presentation I was going to give you this evening is slightly different now to the one that I'd originally planned when we first came online some months back to present, mainly because of where I am and because of the situation that we're in the world at the moment. And I hope you will allow me just to sort of slightly go, I do believe it's relevant, I do believe it's related, and I will make the point as to why it is, and I'll also connect it to how that is relevant to what that means for your own personal investments, what that means for the investments that you may have responsibility for, whether it's at your parish, within the diocese, or through any organisations, but also what it means for you individually. So if you could just sort of bear with me, and hopefully it will become apparent as we go through this. But we're in Cape Town at the moment because there is an African mining conference that brings all the governments, the mining industry together in Cape Town. It's an annual conference. It's called the African Mining Indaba. I advise on that conference, and we have a number of investments as a pension fund in the mining industry. And we seek to play a very particular role in trying to change that industry for the better. We're also here because we recognise that mining contributes to a lot of conflict, and part of the work we're doing is really to catalyse support amongst the wider mining industry, but also amongst other investors, that instead of actually catalysing conflict, sustaining conflict, causing conflict, actually the demand for minerals, the demand for what is dug up ultimately, is enabling development, flourishing communities, and peaceful societies and economic growth. And so hence we're here in Cape Town. I'm just going to bring up a couple of slides just to give you a bit of context of the pension fund. This will all come back down to how I hope I answer the question that David set us. And I should declare an interest. I do know David from his time as a curate at St Anselm's. Separately, I'm very willing to be contacted to provide any feedback on how he was as a curate, what his plus points were. There's a couple, and then what the other points were, because there's quite a few. But no, I'm joking. It was a real privilege to get to know David whilst at St Anselm's. I was church warden, and we had a really wonderful time with him under Reverend Angus at St Anselm's, and delighted that he's ministering where he is, and we occasionally get together with each other. So but there are some stories, and so just reach out to me. Anyway, so moving on. Just to, again, give a bit of this is slightly out of date because we're just about to publish updated information on all of this. The Church of England Pensions Boards, as I mentioned, the numbers have increased, the returns have increased. We've done very well in the past year in terms of the investment returns that we've made, and all of these numbers have changed, but these are the ones that are in the public domain. We report to Synod in the report in a week's time, but nonetheless, they're broadly similar in the sense that as a fund, we're invested in many different kinds of assets, from tracking the stock market through to property, through to bridges, in renewables, through to companies in emerging markets, and to debt, etc. We engage lots of companies. We we reported in 2023 over 1,000 different engagements, and that can range from talking with the chief executive or the chair of a company through to engaging more with the investor team, etc. But we don't do that as a tick box. We do that because we are often driving sector-wide change. So the way that we look at issues is very much at the whole sector, the whole mining industry. So we engage with lots of companies, not just the ones we're invested in. We use our votes. As shareholders, we get to vote. We vote at 99.6% of the company ballots we have, and a number of those votes, like 18%, we vote against management where we don't agree with what's put at the AGM. We often vote with other investors, and often when we're public about how we're going to vote, you'll find other investors that will back us on that as well. And we support most shareholder proposals that are filed. As I say, the return 7.3% in 2023. This past year has been very good for the pension fund, to the point that I think there's going to be some positive news communicated to Diocese as a result of that. This is the kind of slide that you should never present, because it's got too many words and is far too complicated to be able to consume in a short space of time. But nonetheless, I thought I would do that because I'm going to circulate the slide deck and then you can digest at your leisure as well. But really, this sets out the approach that we take, in the sense that fundamentally we are an ethical pension fund. We all have choices in the way that we invest. We seek to ensure that ours is informed ethically. People say that it's not possible to be that not ethical. I personally don't believe that's correct. Every decision you have is grounded in some interpretation of your ethics, or as an institution. As a pension fund, we seek to embed Anglican and Christian teachings in the way that we interpret that into our investments. We're very collaborative. We work with other asset owners. The challenges that we face, and if you think that our youngest pension fund beneficiary, so young clergy entering ministry now, are going to be ministering through to 2100, or starting to receiving pensions in 2100, our duties are over many decades. So our legal duty to provide that pension means that we're looking to make returns, and fulfill the obligation legally that we have to provide that pension, and to do so requires us to look over long time horizons. And so we think in decades. There's quite a lot of short-termism in politics. In the investment industry, there's quarters and daily returns, and there's the indexes going up and down on a second, but we look over decades. And so when you're looking over decades, you look at the issues that are going to challenge you to invest over decades, and things like climate change, things like biodiversity loss. There's many systemic issues that for us are going to challenge our ability to make a return over that time horizon. And whether we invest in a company that's got to manage water in an environment where you have climate change, that is the kind of issue that is relevant to us, because we are looking at a long-term horizon in terms of the need to make that return. We try to be transparent. Our reports are there, they're available, we're open to feedback, and genuinely would welcome your candid feedback. Stewardship is using your vote, using your voice, and really sort of the responsibility you have through ownership and stewarding that responsibility. Integration is in relation to how we convert that commitment we have and the values we have through the way that we then integrate that into our investments. So do we pick a fund manager that we allocate 100 million to that is consistent with our values, or do we pick one that promises higher returns? Those are the kind of debates that we have in the investment committee. I can say to you that the two decisions that we've made over the past year of allocating 100 million, 120 million, both of those we picked the manager that offered us less returns but could demonstrate genuine impact, genuine approaches that were much more aligned with our values. They still met our return requirements, so we were fulfilling our financial duty, but they also met our other requirements. And then, as I said, systemic challenges relates to that time horizon, issues that will challenge us over decades. And so hopefully that gives you a sense of the pension fund. please do interrupt me if I'm using jargon, if I'm going down a path that is unhelpful. Just interrupt me, because I'm conscious that I live in this sort of investment universe, which means that I can slightly get lost in my own rhetoric sometimes. But I'm going to jump into mining now. So you've hopefully got a sense of the foundations here of how we approach this as a pension fund. I recognise as a fund of our size, with the kind of capacity of the kind of superb people that are sitting next to me, that we're able to behave quite differently than a parish or an individual can behave. But that doesn't mean to say that you're not disconnected from the issues that we're engaging with, or that you don't have options in the way that you operate and the policies you set at a diocesan level, in the way that you engage with the funds and where they are put and what you expect from them. And mining for us as a pension fund is hugely relevant and an example of this. And this chart hopefully gives you a sense. I mean, the color coding, basically, if it's yellow, it just shows how important mining is to that country's economy. And at the bottom of Africa, you can see the South Africa. We're in a country where mining is absolutely integral to the economy here. And as an investor in the mining industry, we don't invest in all mining companies. We differentiate between good practitioners with companies that are trying to be better, and we don't invest in those that are not delivering for us, or against values that we have and just would be inappropriate to benefit from. But mining is, as a proportion of our £3.5 billion fund, it's relatively small. To be honest, it's almost immaterial. It feels a bit flippant to say that, in the sense that it's under 100 million. And when you look at a fund of 3.5 billion, a set of investments that are below that is, okay, it's relevant, but it's not that significant. And yet it has a disproportionate impact on a whole raft of sectors that we have very significant investments in. So big tech companies. We're meeting this evening by virtue of technology that is absolutely intrinsically linked to the minerals in your keyboards, into the copper that is through the electricity wires. And so our relationship with mining is integral to our daily lives. It's equally completely connected to many other industries: cars, shipping, aviation, etc. And so from our perspective, we recognize the importance of mining, not just through the size of the investments in those direct companies that mine, but in all the other sectors as it's connected to. But the challenge for us is that mining is fundamentally a destructive act. It rips up parts of creation. That can be done absolutely to devastating effect, and when it goes wrong, it can have enormous social impacts as well as environmental. A lot of the work we've been doing over the past years has been in response to a disaster in Brumadinho in Brazil. I was there last week at the invitation of the families, the 272 people that were killed in Brumadinho when a tailings dam collapsed 6 years ago, which contained the waste from the mine sites. And I was there to be part of the opening of the memorial to those victims. We were invested in Vale, the company whose dam burst, and we had gained profits from that company in that time. It caused one of the biggest environmental disasters in Brazil's history. And we at that point really recognized that we needed to behave very differently as an investment industry that allowed companies like that to behave in the way that they had, cause that kind of impact. And over 6 years, we've worked with industry, we've worked with communities, we've worked with the families of those that were impacted there to really drive a new global standard on how you manage waste, as well as ensuring that we can deliver a future that means that you have no more disasters. So I'm going to now switch to why we're here in South Africa. And this was from the original presentation I was going to give you last time, which was sort of drawing that whole story from mining, why it's relevant, the way that we're connected to it, but also the fact that that there's a broader aspect, which is the fact that mining also contributes to conflict, yet we use what comes from it. And Congo in particular is deeply relevant because a large part of the world's copper comes from Congo. We need the resources from Congo if we're going to transition to net zero. And this is where it gets complicated. We all support net zero. You cannot have net zero without more mining. And so that's where you get into the difficulties where a lot of the NGO community, I think, rightly raise a whole heap of questions and criticisms of the mining sector. But at the same time, there is no path to net zero. There's no path to 2 degrees without more copper, without more coltan, without a whole heap of minerals that the mining sector produces. And so when you have that kind of challenge, because mining done poorly has enormous impacts, as it did in Brazil, and at the same time, a lot of the copper assets that we need for the future come from countries like DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where there is the potential to contribute to a conflict in a country that is fundamentally weakly governed. And so you have real difficulties. And the picture at the top is James jumping off a UN flight that we both took back 6 months ago into landing when we landed in Goma. And you may have seen the news over the past week. Goma fell last weekend to the M23 rebels. And we were in Goma, which was surrounded at the time, and it was the mines to the west of the city were taken by the rebels whilst we're there. They provide 30% of the coltan, and coltan is the mineral that goes into all the technology we're using tonight. I suspect you have a little bit of DRC in your houses or your homes tonight that has probably originated from these mines. Those mines were taken by the rebels, and at the weekend, the city of Goma, which is a city of 2 million, 1 million people internally displaced that were living in it, and that city has fallen. Over 900 people have been killed in the past week. We think that the number's much greater than that. The prisons have been 4,000 prisoners have escaped, and there's absolutely horrific news breaking this evening in terms of what happened when that prison break occurred. It looks like the men were released and they went to the women's wing of the prison and burnt the wing down, raped lots of women and then burnt them. So it's absolutely horrific what's happening in Goma at the moment, and the relationship with minerals is unfortunately one of the key things why you've seen Rwanda back the M23 rebels, put troops across the border, and the minerals from DRC in that region are flown across the border into Rwanda and into our global supply chains. DRC is challenging Apple in the courts at the moment because they're saying that the minerals that Apple are taking are coming from this region. Europe has an agreement with Rwanda for many minerals, none of which are actually found in Rwanda. They are coming from DRC. And so we were visiting Bishop Martin Gordon. He was on the Sunday program speaking about what's happened in Goma. He's currently in the US trying to engage the State Department and the US churches. And today we launched the Goma Call for Peace here in Cape Town. I'm just going to and really the Goma Call for Peace, which I would personally encourage you to consider supporting both individually, as churches, as a diocese, was issued at a press conference today in Cape Town with the Archbishop of Cape Town. We had 2 Congolese of the diaspora that live in South Africa. One, the daughter of parents that were killed in the first conflict, who was recruited as a child soldier and walked to Tanzania before she came to South Africa. And a second Congolese youth leader who was really using his voice because the people of Goma are under occupation. And together with the Bishop of Goma, they issued the Goma Call of Peace. You can go on the website. You'll see both Mike and Favour and Bishop Martin there on the website. And the question for us is, as a pension fund, well, why we're here and we are invested in a sector that is exposed both in the companies that use the minerals and potentially some of the mining companies, and we're trying to use our position to work with other investors to bring pressure upon the government of Rwanda to return to peace talks, to pull back the rebel forces, to pull back their own soldiers, and to encourage the government of DRC to have negotiations. And so really this is absolutely live and relevant at the moment, and it is connected to everything we do. And as I say, when we look at the environment and the global transition, minerals are critical to it, and unfortunately they're going to be coming from environments that are deeply embedded with conflict. And one of the key things is that, and this is very much James's work, that many of those environments that are facing conflict or in conflict or could be in conflict, you'll have faith communities. And often when the governments pull back, when the soldiers go, the faith communities remain. And you have quite remarkable people around the communion that we're working with and trying to find ways to support, to actually really enable them to be able to be builders of peace and ultimately, hopefully, enable reconciliation. But minerals don't have to play this role. And so part of the work that we're doing is really to ensure that minerals can be part of peace processes in a positive way, flipping it from being minerals that sustain and encourage and create conflict to actually minerals that enable communities to flourish for economic development and ultimately for peace and stable communities. And so that's the kind of dynamic we're trying to play here. And it, when I was trying to think through how do I make this relevant to what you do, well, as I said, we are all connected through everything we're using. Everything you're using in that parish either is grown or mined. Every aspect of our commitment to be net zero, to address climate change, is dependent on the mining sector. And the pension fund that you contribute through the church giving is invested in this sector and has opportunity to shape the way that sector behaves. And equally, through your own individual investments, through the choices you make, the managers you appoint, and the expectations you have opportunities to ask questions, ask people to support things, and to seek a kind of investment that really doesn't have the impact that is negative, but ultimately can be working more positively. And what you've got here are a couple of guides that I would recommend that might be worth engaging with. You've also got our formal reporting, there's our annual review, etc. And we're really happy to talk in more detail on any of this as well. But I'm conscious I've probably gone way over the time that you asked me to speak. I would ask you to support the Going Call for Peace and to look that website up and to think of ways that the diocese can support it. I'm delighted that Archbishop Tarbo here has supported it. Archbishop of York has written to the Foreign Secretary. We've been engaging with the Foreign Secretary about the crisis at the moment. There's a limited window to achieve peace, and it's not unrelated to the world's transition on environmental issues as well. But unfortunately, we're entering a very difficult phase of more conflict, greater instability, and actually the church is utterly uniquely placed to play a phenomenally important role because of the presence in many of the environments that there are conflicts, but also because we've learnt how to pull some of the financial levers. And I think that is at the level of yourselves and your own decision making, but also at the level of the way that we operate as a pension fund. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to take any questions. I should acknowledge that James is an absolute the expert on conflict and has a defence intelligence background, and Stephen has much more of the theological grounding and teachings that underpin any of the way that we think this. So happy to take questions or to take this any way that you wish. And hopefully that's not too off-piste.
Adam, you're never off-piste. Thank you very much indeed, Adam. That's great. Hannah has left us because she's got to do far. And that's absolutely fascinating. So what we normally do is we now break out, which Barbara can do, and we just think of some questions and we come back. I think just because we are a little over time, but we're in a unique situation having you talking about this, which is really important in our broader mission and ministry to engage with. So I think if we just broke out into 2 rooms, Barbara, would you be able to do that?
So there'll be 4 or 5 of you in each room.
Some questions in the light of what Adam has said, and then we'll come back and ask you some questions if we may.
Okay.
Really interesting.
And I'll just bring you in again, just sort of probably just under 10.
On finance, there's no stupid questions. We invent our own language so that we sound like we know what we're on about. Please don't feel inhibited in any way. It's gobbledygook. And seriously, common sense questions are the best as well in this industry, I can tell you.
Great. Okay. So I'll put you all in 2 rooms now. You're being moved, apparently, it says. We are moved deeping to the assigned rooms.
Okay. So,
Hooray, good, okay.
We might want to pose to Adam and his team.
Well, one of mine would be, that was also huge and really, oh, waiting in the lobby. Hang on, let me admit Daphne. It was fascinating and huge. and I would like to know, you know, we had a brief discussion around our family tea table tonight, and one of my kids said, I'm thinking about moving my account to Monzo. Is Monzo ethical? I'm just like, well, why don't you go away and look it up? But it's like, where do you start from both an individual level like that, and then if we're trying to talk about it on a Sunday morning at church or in a small group, and we're trying to be practical. I mean, I've got some resources to share at the end, point people towards things, but you know, that would be one of my questions: is can he take a leap from the macro, which we know, you know, we have a part to play, but yeah.
He'd be looking. What should we look for? What are the 3 things we should look for if we're advising a PCC or church members?
Yeah.
For how to invest. Any other thoughts?
One of the difficulties for churches and PCCs is that the existing banking arrangements are so arcane and complex that the prospect of changing them is more than our treasurer can bear, I think.
Yeah.
Naming no names, but I mean.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, you know, we bank with Barclays. We don't want to bank with Barclays in the diocese, or many of us don't. But actually, it's not as simple as switching, because we have to have a certain level of services offered. Legally, we have to say that we are going to hit a certain credit level with that bank and stuff. And it's just not very easy to switch all over and get those services elsewhere. So it's going to be a huge thing. It doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be lobbying Barclays. Don't think they'll take any notice of us, but we should at least be raising our voices. But it is hugely complicated.
Richard, I think what you're saying, Richard, if I'm right, I mean, the difficulty at the parish level of a PCC changing a bank account is ridiculous. It is so outrageously formulaic and bureaucratic that shifting in order to do it is that, so a lot of PCCs are just stuck.
Well, that's where we find ourselves.
Yeah.
We would like to go with an ethical bank, but we're with Barclays, and it's just very complicated to do, it seems.
Yeah.
So we could ask him, how important does he think it is that we switch to ethical banks?
Yeah.
I think that could be quite interesting. Any other questions, do you think?
About questions, it's reassuring to hear that the church are involved in lobbying the government against what's going on in Rwanda and Congo. I know very little about it, but I read a bit in the paper the other day to say that the European Union and Great Britain are sponsoring Rwanda and arming them, which is unthinkable, isn't it? So yeah, I was just reassured to hear that there's bishops involved in lobbying the government directly with side knowledge of what's happening.
Yeah, I don't think that is shared widely enough, actually.
We could do with it.
I know it's shared in the financial press, so I read it, you know, when we get the Church of England round robin about here's where the Church of England's been in the news this week, but I don't think that's communicated at diocesan levels and parish levels, that which would be good, really, to know that that's happening. Which is actually maybe something for their comms people to share a bit more.
I think it would be really good if we had the letter that the Archbishop of York wrote to the Foreign Secretary and actually had a view of it, because we should see some of the broader remit and rather than just focus on the horrors of the other scandals that are coming through, which are I wondered if is there a question we think around mining, minerals and net zero, which he raised.
But you can't have net zero without, like, well, it's like batteries, isn't it? From everything from storing solar to powering cars. We need lithium and cobalt, and they're all mined. Yeah. So again, it's good to hear that they're working on because then all you can do is, we need that. They're in countries that are desperately poor. So we should be valuing them. The world needs them. And so for us to play our role in lobbying to say, but we want them to come from, it would be interesting to know if he thinks, the trouble is we are so far removed as consumers. We can go into Sainsbury's and say, we don't want the plastic around our apples or whatever, take them out of the plastic bags. We don't want that. We can lobby Sainsbury's about that, or whoever, Asda or other supermarkets. But it's much harder for us to make that link to say, we don't want to buy our phones where the copper has come from a mine that isn't ethical.
I also don't know how many ethical options are there. Like, if I want to buy a new phone, I can't think of any company where, I'm sure there may be some out there where I can buy where I know this has been mined in an ethical way, and the people that are working in the mines, it's a safe environment for them and they're getting compensated fairly. So it's difficult to make the ethical decision if you don't actually know there's anything on the market that is ethical.
Yeah. I mean, there's Fairphone that tries to do that, which is a bit like, fair trade gold and everything else. But that's the only one I know of.
Fairphone is extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah, they are. That's the trouble,
But is there? Are you asking from a more granular PCC perspective, Barbara? Just sort of trying to put your comment into a question.
Is there anything that we can really effectively do as consumers? I suppose, because we encourage people in parishes to, I do in my parish, about their buying power. But this feels like it's too far removed for that to really have any efficacy or any effect. Just, I'd be interested to hear what he's got to say.
3 questions, I think, have come out.
Okay.
How important do we think it is that we should switch to ethical banks? 3 criteria, 3, I mean, 3 is a number I've plucked out, criteria to look for in ethical banks. Is there anything we can do as consumers to help ethical mining, I think? Enable ethical mining?
Yeah, that sounds good. Good question.
Encourage.
But I think it would be nice to feedback Richard's point as well about how reassuring it is to hear, and maybe national comms or whatever they are, the NCI comms people could share this more widely. Would be good. Tell the stories. He was talking about individuals there that have been impacted by mining, that they're telling the stories of. It's like, those would be really good stories to share.
Do we want to how do we want to put these questions, as I'm sort of?
Well, I think you just ask him and he answers.
I'll ask those ones and you can chip in. Any more? Do we see how we are? Because I'm a bit worried about.
I think we need to
break out of our breakout room.
So I'm supposed to just hit breakout rooms again, and then
see what happens.
It assured me that I would be able to bring people back, and it's
not. Are they in a different breakout room, or did
anything?
Did you put
so I'm just going to close them. I hope. Close that room, and then close this room. Okay, apparently we're being moved back now.
Like that, yeah.
Couldn't see an easy way of telling people that they were about to be moved back, but probably mid-sentence, sorry.
There we go.
Hooray. Everybody's coming back. Phew.
Brilliant.
Sorry if you were mid-sentence. I couldn't see an easy way of letting you know that I was about to pull you back in.
So, we are going to finish by in the next 15 minutes, so we need to be quite pithy on this. And I just wondered, I've got some questions and statements from our breakout room that I was in, and I just wondered if there are any from the other breakout room. If you have any questions you want to put to Adam, James, and Stephen.
Well, I was making a point. Sorry.
Hold on. If you could you raise a hand so I know where you are, because otherwise I can't see it. That would be great. Right. Okay. So hold on. Shall I go to Harvey and then I'll go to the Remmers? It just says the Remmers. So Harvey first.
Yes, I was talking about the business of long-term investment. You can't keep chopping and changing. And one of the arguments that I've heard about as a criticism, in a sense, is how we keep in companies. And then the counter argument is if we keep in them and use our shares to influence change. I wondered what the feedback to that sort of discussion would be.
Adam and team.
I'm going to ask Stephen to answer that.
Sure. So it's a very good question, and it's kind of at the heart of some of the campaigning that we get faced with from groups like Operation Noah, for example, that push very hard for disinvestment, and in some cases disinvestment is appropriate. And we have advice from the Ethical Investment Advisory Group, which is one of the resources that you might like to look at. They have 21 advisory memos published online that include theological reflection, a discussion among a group of theologians, philosophers, business people and investors that come to a kind of reasoned conclusion around what is appropriate to do from an ethical investment point of view, bearing in mind the Anglican social teaching and the history of kind of thinking about the church in society throughout the years. So in some areas, disinvestment is appropriate, but we take an engagement first approach when it comes to any individual company. So we'll try and understand the nature of the issue. We'll try and influence the company to bring about change. And if they don't satisfy our expectations or give us confidence that they take the issue seriously enough, then we'll divest. We disinvest from about 500 companies in a universe of about 6,000 investable companies. So that gives you a sense of the number of companies that are beyond the pale. But really the point of stewardship is that we're not burying our talents. We're not kind of exiting from the market. We're involved. We're trying to drive change and have a good quality dialogue as a conscience for the market. As one of our members said in reading our stewardship report, that they liked the fact that we're voting at company AGMs on the basis of ethical policies, and that's like we're acting like a conscience in the market and casting our vote like that. And sometimes we pre-declare the way we're going to cast our vote, and other investors will pay attention to that and come on board as well. So that's kind of a roundup. And stewardship is the way is more likely, I think, to bring about change than disinvestment, because when you divest, you sell to someone else. Someone else buys the shares and continues the ownership. It doesn't necessarily or immediately change the price of the company and affect company management that way. Even the largest investor in the world, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, when they announce that they've disinvested from a company, that doesn't really move the price, a fraction of a percent for 3 days, but then it recovers. So divestment as a tactic is not necessarily the most effective way. It can have a declarative role, it can show to the market how seriously you take something, but with stewardship first. I think that's the message there.
Thank you, Stephen, very much. Okay, and then thank you for that. The Remmers.
Oh,
why don't you?
yes. So I think maybe the last slide you showed before we went into breakout groups was going to tell us perhaps the answer to this, but as individuals, when you sort of sit around with a financial advisor and you're talking about what funds you might want to go into, obviously it's quite there's a few names that sort of could fly around, but how would you dig a bit deeper as a sort of just a sort of normal Joe in the street, just to find out about the background to some of these perhaps bigger funds that we might be persuaded to put some of our money into?
So Stephen's job is to manage our oversight of the managers. So we don't make individual decisions. So we don't sort of sit there with our investments and say, right, we're going to do Shell or not do BP, and we allocate, and we often allocate it around 100 million. So obviously our relationship's different with our managers, but Stephen's job is to oversee that relationship with the managers and ensure that those managers implement our expectations, and we talk with them, we understand them. And so the kind of questions that you, I think, are wanting to ask are the ones that he asks. So back to Stephen.
So
that's not a hospital pass.
No, it's not. No,
he actually knows what he's on about.
So a good financial advisor will work with you to understand your risk appetite, which is very important in terms of choosing investments, and will try to help you choose managers based on your preferences, and those can be a broad range of preferences, including ethical investment choices. They should have an assessment of the funds from that point of view. To what extent does the fund take into account environmental and social and governance concerns? When it comes to interrogating the managers that have been selected that you're already invested in, the Church Investors Group has got a really handy guide, and Adam brought that up on the slides, and it's published on the Church Investors Group website. And just to tell you what the Church Investors Group is, it's a group of 67 members, church-related members, dioceses, archdioceses, religious orders, and the national investing bodies of the Church of England that manage about 26 billion pounds of assets under management. And it's a community of practice, so sharing best ideas and good ideas for ways of doing things where the trustees of an institution might not have the capacity, might not have an executive to do the diligence. So we tend to come out with, I say we, sit on the board, we tend to come out with kind of helpful guides that can do exactly this. And there's a whole list of questions that I won't be able to do justice to in a quick answer. So
thank you.
Any other questions out there from the other group? All right. I mean, say just a little group, Adam, and maybe some response. First of all, we want to say how reassuring it is to hear that the bishops are engaging at such a high level. And we also thought that perhaps it would be a good thing that that letter that the Archbishop of York sent to the Foreign Secretary was made more public, if that was possible. That might be quite an interesting thing to put out there. So that was it. We wondered about minerals and net zero, and how we, at the parish level and individual level, what sort of position we are in to encourage ethical mining, or are we too far down the food chain?
I don't think you're ever too far down the food chain. I think that why shouldn't you have a set of expectation and values that you should be expressing? As to whether that then enables people to behave differently in responding to that is a different question. I don't think you should inhibit yourself from thinking just because of the size of the parish investment or the banks that you choose that you shouldn't think that there's perspectives that you can share into that. And I think the more that people that do that, ultimately it enables a broader set of views to be floated up into the bigger decision making. Of course, as a fund that we are, I mean, as I say, we're a relatively small fund, but we've got an oversized influence because we can mobilize trillions of others behind us. So again, if you think in that mindset that actually, okay, your voice might be small, but actually if other parishes are taking similar perspectives, similar concerns, thoughtful positions, then actually you are amplifying into the system. So I wouldn't undervalue it. I think you've got to be realistic about the expectations of immediate impact, etc. But I don't think it's wasted. I do think it's relevant that, and I don't know the details of your fund on the funds that you have available or how you can do that, but feeding those things through, I do think is absolutely relevant. I don't know, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, even small questions can have big consequences, and the tools that you use and the kind of third-party references that you bring into the conversation can be really impactful. So the Transition Pathway Initiative is an initiative that Adam founded back in 2017, and it includes, for example, an assessment of 26 of the major international banks on their climate credentials. So if you are selecting a bank for your parish, then taking that kind of assessment into consideration and letting the candidate banks know that you're taking that into consideration is part of building pressure over time. And TPI is backed by about $60 trillion of assets under management now, which to leave you with a nice image, 1 million seconds takes 8 days, 1 billion seconds takes 32 years, and 1 trillion seconds takes 32,000 years. So to have $60 trillion backing an initiative that was led by the Church of England and the Environment Agency back in 2017 can show what starts small can actually build when it's a reasonable ask about matters that everyone should care about. And it can be, and has been influential in the market. So
that's fascinating and covers, I think, the other question, which was about switching banks, because I think you grab it there, and that's a lovely phrase for us to think as a small number of people in this eco forum this evening, although I hope that what will radiate out from this will go to many others and PTCs and colleagues, that small questions can have big consequences is a really important mantra perhaps to take out of this. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm looking at the time, and so we're just going to now move from this into pointing to other resources, which is Barbara.
So I'm just going to literally paste into the chat some links, some live links there. I just wanted to point out that on the Diocese of Norwich finance pages that our finance team put all the information about advice to parishes, there's a line that's been added last year. At one of our finance officers added a line that shows the CO2 ratings that's been given by Mother Tree. So they were saying where parishes are looking to move their bank accounts, you can do a comparison across on that page to take that into account. But I am very aware that a number of our parishes are having huge issues, and Richard brought this up in our breakout room, that trying to move is incredibly frustrating and is not being helped at a local parish level by particular banks. And just to say, we feel your pain, because likewise, diocesan wise, it's incredibly tricky to find a bank that will offer the same as our current one. And we are looking to work with 12 other dioceses who also bank with Barclays to see if there might be some lobbying we can do if we can't move very quickly. And I'm working on that with some other DEOs at the moment. We're hoping to get together at our national gathering in March to look at what that might look like and how we might work better with our finance directors to make that happen. So I think it is about coming at it from every different angle, really. It's about really what you were saying earlier about this idea of we can make our voices heard, but we want to be part of a conversation as well. It's not just about campaigning, but it is about saying this is what we want to see happen, rather than just simply switching. So there's a conversation to be had, and I guess that's for all of us, with the question that was asked earlier about if you sit down with a financial advisor, what are the questions that you want to ask? I would just like to go back. Sorry, I can't remember if Stephen or James mentioned, I think it was James, about are you able, have you just put something up there? Sorry, because I'm talking and I'm not looking at the list, the different things that have been added. When you were talking about the different people that you got together, the theologians, the philosophers, etc., to look across, is there somewhere you can point us to where we can find that information? Is that up there in that what we've been putting in the chat?
We're about to put it in the chat now.
Brilliant. Okay, because it's that sort of thing that if we can point to things like that. And also, just to say, when you were talking earlier, Adam, and you were telling the stories about the individuals, we know that's what makes the difference between us feeling so far removed from the cobalt that's being mined that ends up in our phone or our car or whatever. And we don't hear a lot of that. I see it in the Church of England media digest that comes round, and it's in financial papers or financial websites and stuff. But for sort of national comms to be telling that story more in terms of with some of the impacts that it's actually having on the ground and what the churches are doing would just be a really great thing to be able to share through our parishes and through our eco groups and stuff like that, because I think anything that can help people feel connected, and the Anglican Communion has such a brilliant opportunity to do that, you know, to communicate those stories and show how we are connected and how our faith can have such a huge impact connecting person to person in the choices that we're making here in Norwich compared to you know, Norwich to Nairobi or whatever, you know. Nairobi's not a mining place, but you know, something like that would be great.
To be honest, that's the most justified. It's very justified criticism. We are failing miserably to translate the kind of dynamics that we're working in to the wider sort of congregations, and equally acknowledging the fact that you have a direct relationship with the pension fund through the giving on a Sunday and through church giving, and we find it very difficult to get coverage in Church Times for anything vaguely financial or anything like this. I can get into the Financial Times. I think we're in there tomorrow. I mean, I can get into the Economist. I can't get into the Church Times, and so we've got to find better ways of communicating and really double down on that. So we take that. We are trying to find ways to do that. We're also open to suggestions, and equally, if it means we need to be talking more in fora like this, then we're also happy to do that. But but that's very fair and justified feedback.
It's almost, I guess, 10 o'clock where you are, and we're so grateful. I see Rachel is on the line, and I think there might be a line that there should be a financial column in the Church Times. There's something in that we can think about. With 1 minute to go, I can't thank you enough, Stephen, Adam, and James, for taking time. Really, very seriously, there's an extraordinary eco forum for us to hold with you in South Africa with Goma. So I'm going to close in prayer and then close the meeting. And this is a prayer for Goma. We pray this evening for all in Goma. We pray that those of the M23 group will have mercy on those they have now custodian of. We pray for peace, for violence to be put to one side, for the vulnerable to be protected. We pray most especially for the women of Goma. Lord, we ask for your protection on that city. We ask for your wisdom in all that is before us, for your fortitude to be with those who are working for peace in that place and peace throughout this world. We ask, O Lord, for your divine protection on all the vulnerable this night. We ask this through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Good to see you all. Love to Lizzie. Right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining us.